Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. There was some basketball over the weekend. I found myself a little more glued to it after a few weekends of non-NFL action, and I'm really not into the XFL so far. Luke Jones joining us here. He is awaiting baseball. We had a rare doubleheader on Sunday around here, didn't we? The Angelos family kind enough to beam in the satellite signal from Sarasota with some Orioles action. But the Terps, it was not their best effort. At some point, you're going to trip and fall. You can't win them all that good stuff. Overrated, underrated, wherever you want to put the Big Ten. It's still really tough to win on the road. And Maryland finally sort of met their maker in Columbus on Sunday, Luke.
Yeah, and I think, disappointment, sure. A missed opportunity, no question about it, when you look at what had happened in the top five over the weekend.
Everybody
lost. Number one, number two, number four. Duke was number 6. They lost earlier in the week, and an ugly loss against NC State. So you look at that, and you hear the bracketologists, whether it's Joe Lunardi or any of the other pundits, they were all talking about going into Sunday's game that Maryland wins, they might find themselves on the 1 line. And now they still have some time that they can do that. But you look at how Sunday played out. They got very little from Anthony Cowan. They got very little from Jalen Smith. I think one of the more interesting storylines that have developed over the course of the season was going into the year. We talked so much about Maryland's depth, the potential that they could go 8, 9, 10 deep. That really hasn't presented itself. It's been much more of a 6-man rotation, and then they'll fit a couple other guys in there here and there. So there's still that question in the big picture as we get into March. But as far as Sunday goes, it was a missed opportunity, but by no means is that a game over which to panic. By no means is that a game where you look at that and say, well, Maryland's overrated. I think they ran into an Ohio State team that played really well. They shot the ball well, which is something that they're known for. They hit outside shots. They were 23 of 28 from the line.
Well, they force you to guard the perimeter, and even when
Sure.
you do, they make shots.
Sure. So I don't think this is a loss to be overly concerned about or to say, okay, well, here we go again with Mark Turgeon. Now, if they follow that up with a road loss at Minnesota and all of a sudden they're limping in with a couple losses here over the next couple weeks going into the Big Ten tournament, then I'll hear some of the concern as far as, okay, is this team peaking or are they starting to regress a little bit? But it was their first loss since mid-January. They had won 9 in a row. Ohio State's beaten some really high-quality teams, even if they've had some inconsistency in the Big Ten.
40 days without losing, man. That's hard to do in January and February in any conference. I don't care what conference you're in. Ryan Odom's pitching them real well right now for UMBC. They got healthy, and they're winning some ball games. But, you look down, you see W's out on WNST.net on our, on the backside of our, it's like W's for a month. It's impressive. It's kind of like what the Ravens did with Lamar, right?
No question. You look at the Big Ten this year. Every team is of a certain amount of quality until you get to the very bottom, and you see Nebraska 2-13. You see Northwestern 1-15 in the Big Ten. But beyond that, you go on the road, you don't know what's going to happen. That's why, as I said, I don't think this is a loss over which to panic. But you need to take care of business Wednesday night at Minnesota. You need to take care of business next week when you go to Rutgers, which we know is a very challenging place to play, despite it being Rutgers, a team that you don't necessarily think of in terms of the college basketball landscape. But I think you just said it, and you almost took the words right out of my mouth. When you see what happened with the Ravens after such an incredible run, the Terps seeing their win streak come to an end late in the regular season, I'm not going to be overly concerned about that as long as you see them bounce back and have. And I don't even think it was an effort thing. I think they battled considering how little they got from Smith and Cowan. Wiggins was big for them. Ayala made some shots for them, but it just wasn't quite enough, and you have to tip your cap to Ohio State. And sure, Maryland fans listening right now will even point to a couple questionable calls late in the game, certainly the sequence that led to Anthony Cowan fouling out due to a technical foul after the non-call on the layup. But long story short, Maryland just wasn't quite good enough on Sunday, and Ohio State played really well.
Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. There is a rumor we're going to attempt to go down to College Park and Route 1 for the Michigan State game coming up this weekend. And, as we end the Ravens thing and we're looking for something sort of to grab onto a little bit, the Terps have made sort of a fun little a detour for this in a way that I don't know that you and I believe they were even going to make when we were sitting in Miami a couple of weeks ago. They were just sort of finding themselves at that point. But this has been as exciting a Maryland team as you'd want to see, and quite frankly, it was a pretty good game on Sunday. I felt like they were teetering the whole time. They played the whole game from behind by a couple of buckets, but it always felt like they were capable. And all that being said, you talk about depth. When somebody gets hurt and is unavailable, and someone else sort of disappears, you better hope Wiggins steps up, and he did to some degree. But, I will hear where is the bench, and I will hear, boy, you're going to need that in games 3, 4, and 5 if you're going to go getting through March, right?
Right. And that's where there is a little more concern about this team. Their top 6, I'll take that against just about anyone in the country. And that's not to say that Maryland's the best in the country, but they can compete with anyone. They're a top 10 team for that reason. But you look beyond that, and where are they getting contributions other than Aaron Wiggins coming off of the bench? Chol Marial gave him some okay minutes on Sunday, but we've seen how that's gone. Hart comes in. He hadn't played in a long time. So you can tell Mark Turgeon's trying to find something other than Wiggins to come off the bench and contribute for them. Sorrell Smith has disappeared. So they're looking for that. They're searching for that. And have there been teams that have made deep runs in the NCAA tournament that are really, truly only about 6 deep, maybe 7 deep? Sure, you see that. But ideally, you'd like to have 8. You'd like to have a 9th that can come off the bench and give you a few useful minutes here and there. And I do think that's something that is a question. But as it pertains to Sunday, they did get outstanding contributions from Wiggins. They did get really strong contributions from Ayala, and I think those two are such an X factor for them. You expect Cowan and Jalen Smith, and look, they only had 4 combined field goals. You're not going to expect that. You're not.
Well, that's how you lose in Columbus. If you wake up on Monday and say, I missed the game, you're like, hey, those guys didn't play well, they didn't play, or, one of them, then that's how you're going to get. That's how you're going to lose in the Sweet 16, quite frankly.
Sure, no question about it. But at the same time, if you're talking about Maryland going from being a good team to a great team, that's when you get the contributions from Wiggins and Ayala. And we've seen Ayala shoot the ball better in recent weeks. We know he has not shot the ball like he did last year by any stretch. And Wiggins, when he's right, he's as talented as anyone they have. So I think I haven't mentioned. I'd be remiss if I haven't mentioned Dante Scott, who I think you've seen some growth from him in recent weeks. A freshman who is playing late in the Big Ten schedule, late in the Big Ten season, and it doesn't look too big for him. So that's been good to see. So I think the components are there. There's no question about that. But you'd like to have that extra guy or two off the bench that can give you some offense or give you some rebounding, or even just play some good defense for you. And that they're getting a little bit of that, but not as much as you'd like. Right now this team has 6 guys that you feel really good about, and then it kind of depends after that. So I think that's going to be an interesting question. It's one thing to talk about the NCAA tournament, but even think about the Big Ten tournament where you're playing on consecutive days. In the Big Dance, you at least have that off day in between rounds over the weekend.
Well, that's why you need the double bye, and that's why they need to pick it up, not have them lose 3 of these games before the end of the season, right?
And I think they're in pretty darn comfortable position there. Penn State lost again over the weekend.
Yeah, everybody else beats everybody else up, right? Maryland's the only team that hasn't lost in a month, even though some teams have sort of come and gone in the conference, including Michigan State, who, this game, we circled this on the calendar when the schedule comes out 8 months ago and said, hey, this is going to be a big game, and Michigan State has sort of fallen from grace, and it's teams like Ohio State that you would say, Well, they're not going to be ranked when you get there at the end of February. Well, look up. And there's been a lot of sort of topsy-turvy in the conference. I wanted to throw this your way because sitting around on a Sunday and putting on some baseball, meaningless baseball, the game's 10-1, you're watching Seton Hall or whatever, waiting for Maryland to come on, and you're thinking, man, Sunday afternoon, look at these game times. They're playing Saturday night at 8 o'clock next week. It doesn't feel like sort of that Tuesday, Saturday afternoon ACC vibe that we had forever, that it feels like they can play anytime, anywhere. And okay, I mean, I'm a big boy and it's 2020. But there's always a feeling about the Big Ten it's going to be a little less than exciting, or that when they get into these games in the middle of February, something will be different or missing. I'll tell you what, a number 7 versus number 25 on foreign court in a gym that it got rowdy in there. I know it sounded more like a football destination than a basketball destination. But sitting there watching that, I'm thinking to myself, would you really rather be in the ACC now? All these years in, when Maryland is the big dog in the conference, at least for the time being, and they're the hunted, and they haven't lost in a month, and they're going to these big campuses. I don't know. I know it's been maligned, and I always put my dipstick in and say, where are we with Maryland, and why do people not go to the games, and why is my timeline not alive when Maryland's the 7th-ranked team in the country and there's a damn thing else going on a Sunday afternoon? I mean, the usual suspects are watching Maryland, but much like the Orioles, they really don't have what the Ravens have, which is the minute Lamar Jackson wakes up, people come running back to the Purple Bird. Man, the Terps are the 7th-ranked team in the country on a rampage, and Maryland fans will stop, but it's not like they're picking new people up along the side of the road. And I think when you do come to them and you put on a Big Ten game, it's a pretty good brand of basketball. I mean, these games are exciting for me.
Yeah, it is, and I think there are different factors for that. I mean, one, the Baltimore, D.C. area, it's a professional market.
Fair enough.
Even if you talk about where the Terps were 20 years ago under Gary Williams, it probably wasn't as big as it should have been, quite frankly. And that's not to say that guys like me didn't have a lot of joy from that, but the region in its totality, it's been more of a professional market. That's why, I think this is much more of a, when you look at Maryland football, even when they have their spikes where they're a little bit better, and I know they're not 11-1 good when they're good, but those years where they're 8-4, they're certainly bowl eligible. That just doesn't move the meter in that way. And you just mentioned. Even the Ravens before Lamar Jackson came around, the last few years had been, kind of sleepy relative when you talk about the NFL compared to any other sport. Understanding that it is king by a wide margin, but I think it's interesting as we've gotten so far removed from the whole ACC Big Ten thing. First of all, we know how much, it was financially driven. There's just no discussion in that regard. But when you do look at the ACC at this point, that's not the same anymore either. We're not talking about the old 9-team format where the 8-9 played on Thursday night, and then you had, after that, the 8-team ACC tournament. You have teams like Louisville in there, and Notre Dame, and Syracuse, Boston, you just go down the list. Boston College, Virginia Tech, Miami. It's not the same Pitt. It's not the ACC anymore as you remember it, as you recall it 20 years ago. Would it be nice to play Duke and North Carolina? Absolutely. I miss those rivalries, but to your point, when you do look at the Big Ten, it is different, and I think we talked about this a lot with Maryland from a regional standpoint, how much further away they were from the rest of the ACC and Tobacco Road, and how that was a disadvantage.
And Carolina refs. Don't forget them, yes.
And by the way, that hasn't gotten any better either when you kind of look at how that conference is spread out. But you have some of that with the Big Ten. You look at Maryland, it's like, okay, Rutgers is close by. Penn State's close by, and when I say close, relatively close.
By the way, Dick Girardi and Joe Boylan both joining us this week from Penn State and Rutgers. Ready? It's been a little while. I haven't had a whole lot of college basketball on. I'm going all in this week. How about that?
Yeah, well, why not? If you can in late February and early March, when are you going?
Yeah, we're going to go all in. We're a week and a half, 2 weeks out on a Big Ten tournament now. We're going to get in. We're going to get in.
Yeah, sure. But with all those factors and acknowledging that, and conference realignment across the country, and I'm sure we're going to see more of it as time goes on. I don't think we've seen the end of it in that way, and I don't even know what it'll look like 15 or 20 years down the road. But you do look at how this Maryland team has played. They've gone into some hostile environments. You look at the Big Ten right now. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, other than Nebraska and Northwestern, you go anywhere in the Big Ten right now, and you're facing a viable opponent. Even look at the bottom, towards the bottom of the standings. I mean, Maryland's going to play Minnesota on Wednesday night. That's not a gimme by any stretch.
Well, it wasn't a couple years ago. I remember a lot of hurt feelings up there at the barn that night. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, Ohio State on Sunday. I mean, that was a challenge, obviously, and one that the Terps.
Well, now that you get 10 years into this, you're going to have gotten your ass kicked in every gym in the conference, and you're going to have beaten Tom Izzo at home and on the road once in a while, as they did a week and a half ago. So yeah, I mean, that's what gets you the warm fuzzies and the good vibes, and these kids that are down on campus will spend the rest of their life hating Northwestern or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, you hope that's cultivated over time. I mean, we've already seen it. We've already talked about it.
As long as you and me and Bruce Posner can get on board with this Big Ten thing, and I guess my point is, this is, I don't long for anything, and when I sit and watch these games, I think it's a pretty good game. And to your point, when Penn State and Rutgers are recruiting, quality kids, it makes the whole thing better. Who knows that Maryland and Penn State aren't real basketball rivals 5 or 10 years from now? That's certainly possible, much more so than football, to your point. The fact that Maryland's ever going to get up and run with a football program, okay, I'll believe that when I see it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we have to also be realistic. I mean, Penn State's had a heck of a year, but this is the best Penn State team of my lifetime, and I'm 36 years old. So,
but that's not to say that I've always wondered why they didn't recruit better. I always wondered why basketball players didn't come there when you could get 40 good football players. How can you not get 3 good basketball players out of Philly or Pittsburgh? And I think that's changing, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the ebbs and flows over the years. I mean, you have your blue blood programs that are great every single year, and you always question how much of it's on the up and up, even with those programs, let alone anyone else that tries to be an upstart. But that cynicism aside, I mean, it's fun. I mean, it's kind of cool to see Maryland be in the Big Ten, and as much as there's been frustration with Mark Turgeon and the direction of the program and not doing better in the NCAA tournament and all of those issues, which still, haven't disappeared in my mind, but when you look at how this team has played over the last 6 weeks, how can you not embrace it? How can you not have fun with it? And the fact that Maryland has been able to handle its business for the most part on the road in a conference where that has not happened very much, that's where you do have some optimism. And look, we'll see how the Big Ten tournament goes. We'll see how the NCAA tournament goes. But I think you look at this Maryland team, as much as Sunday was a missed opportunity to move into that one line potentially, and for Maryland to differentiate themselves, maybe Sunday was a reminder that they're very similar to the rest of the teams in the top 10, where we know that there's some vulnerability. And any of those teams could lose the first weekend of the tournament, and you probably wouldn't even.
Dude, you want to be on the one line, go win the Big Ten tournament. That's simple as that.
That's the thing. I mean, if you bounce back and you take care of business over these last few regular season games and you go into the Big Ten tournament and take care of business there, then they're going to have a heck of a shot at a number 1 seed. You're still at the mercy of what other teams are doing, of course, but you'll have a heck of a shot to be on that line. But even if you're not a 1, they're in position to be a very high seed, and so much of it's just going to come down to the draw. And as we mentioned, between now and then, can they develop a little bit more from their bench? I mean, I think that's something that would be huge for them, because when you are in a position like they were Sunday, where Jalen Smith deals with foul trouble, not overly impactful. Anthony Cowan, while he was good from the line, only had, 1 field goal on Sunday. Is there one other guy that can emerge for you to give you a little bit more off the bench? I mean, it's great that Wiggins can do it, and he was huge for them on Sunday, but if there's one other guy that can just add a little more consistently, then I like this team even more. But again, disappointing on Sunday, but there's still a lot to be excited about with this team, and they've been the class of the Big Ten, and there are a ton of people who think very, very highly of this conference. And as we mentioned, as much as it's been some topsy-turvy, and some teams that you think are great, and they end up maybe not being so great, and then other teams that you weren't even talking about are suddenly really, really strong. This is a well-regarded conference, considered the best in the country, top to bottom when you look at its depth. So for Maryland to be running the show there, that says something, and that's a reason to be excited about this team over these next few weeks.
Big Ten tournament coming up in a couple of weeks in Indianapolis, where Luke and I managed to avoid it this week, although I will have Jeff Zrebeck on from The Athletic a little later on in the week. I want to give some thanks to Raskin Global. I'm wearing my Raskin Global shirt. I got a chance to meet Leonard's whole team with Raskin Global out in Hunt Valley the other night. Make sure you're checking them out at raskinglobal.com. Also spent the day with my friends at Liberty Pure and Doug Workman, along with Matt Stover. You'll hear that this week. Lots and lots of basketball stuff. We got baseball stuff out of Sarasota coming up this week. And, of course, Ravens and more Ravens, and plenty of Terps and Big Ten stuff, as well as Baltimore Positive. Sheila Dixon committed to Baltimore Positive in 2 weeks. We're going to have her. We also have a big announcement about an event on April the 14th. I want you to hold that date. Big thanks to Royal Farms. They farmed me in Western fries. I had Western fries during the second half of the game. Thank you, Peter DeLutis and Ed Stronsky and Frank Schilling and all our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. I was also at Pizza John's last week, but had the leftover heart pizza with my wife on Sunday night after the Terps game. How about that? Little green pepper, little red pepper on there. Thanks, Pizza John's in Essex. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. The buyatoyota.com audio vault is there 24 hours a day for anything we're doing around here, and that's lots and lots of cool stuff this week, including Steve Gorman, the drummer from the Black Crowes, a Marylander, Severna Park grad as well. You'll be hearing from him about his book on the Black Crowes and the life and times with them. So a little music, a little politics, a little sports. Got you covered. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports and stuff.